Hello and welcome. Thanks for coming along today and joining me. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This webinar on preventing elder abuse is brought to you by Compass. Compass is the national website connecting people to services and information, tackling elder abuse in all its forms. Compass is created by Elder Abuse Action Australia with funding from the Australian Government, the Attorney General's Department. Compass is committed to ensuring equitable and inclusive responses to end elder abuse for everyone affected, including people with diverse characteristics and life experiences. Elder Abuse Action Australia, or EAAA, is the national voice for action to eliminate elder abuse through advocacy, policy development, best practice, research, and capacity building. If you or anyone you know is experiencing elder abuse or at risk of experiencing or suffering elder abuse, go to www.compass.info. There is also the Elder Abuse Hotline. It's free and confidential. 1-800-ELDER-HELP. That number, 1-800-353-374. That number again, 1-800-353-374. During this session, I urge you to ask questions in the chat room. And we ask everyone to be respectful and not to name names or have anything that would identify an individual. Today, we're bringing together the experts to help you identify the ways you can reduce the risks of elder abuse. In talking about prevention, we hope to help you learn how you can protect yourself from it occurring, to discover steps you can take to protect yourself from financial abuse, and how to be aware of the warning signs of elder abuse. If you're concerned about an older person's vulnerability to abuse, find out some of the steps that you can take to reduce or minimise their exposure. Don't forget all the terrific resources on compass.info, and there are a lot of new resources on the website as I speak. It's my pleasure to introduce our panellists. Kate Gibson is an experienced primary prevention practitioner, having worked across different settings, including local government, women's health, and the community legal sector in Melbourne's East. Her work has focused and is focused on shifting harmful stereotypes and cultural norms that set a social context in which family violence can occur. Roy Starkey has spent most of his professional life in community support and healthcare. With qualifications in nursing, psychology and education, he's worked in mental health, palliative care, care coordination, diversity advocacy, and the funeral industry. During the HIV epidemic, Roy was a nurse, volunteer, and care coordinator with several organisations. Tiffany Lewin is a senior business executive with Westpac, whose 30-year career in Australia and abroad spans diverse sectors, including financial services, consumer goods, manufacturing, and professional services. In 2015, she joined Westpac through the inaugural Equilibrium program, targeting mid-career women from outside finance. Welcome and thank you to our panelists and to all our participants. Now, to kick it off, Kate Gibson, as the manager of primary prevention at a legal centre, how much of your work is dedicated to preventing elder abuse? And could you give us an overview of what you do?
Sure, thanks, Philippa. So we do spend a significant time working in primary prevention space, including elder abuse. And we see primary prevention as an important part of the continuum when we're addressing elder abuse. And the work sits firmly alongside our early intervention and response work. So primary prevention is a bit different because it understands that individuals don't act independently of social constructs and societal norms that we're all surrounded by and live within. So as practitioners, we need to zoom right out from the individual and acknowledge what those broader influences are that shape our society. So these could be things like consumerism, capitalism, colonisation. And what we find is these frameworks actually influence our cultural beliefs and attitudes and the way we interact with the world and each other. So primary prevention doesn't claim to be able to change those things, but we inform our practice with this knowledge. And what underpins our practice is the knowledge that these things can be prevented by addressing the drivers and contributing factors, by challenging and shifting harmful social and cultural norms, such as valuing young over old. So at ECLC, we work with many of our partner organisations, including local governments and community services, including facilitating a statewide network of services through a community of practice model. We've done some research around how ageism is experienced in our region called the Opera Project. We have developed recently a framework to prevent the abuse of older people in Melbourne's East. And most recently, we developed a community wellbeing and social connectedness project with an intergenerational lens across it. So I would just like to quickly acknowledge I have referred to colonisation as a driver of elder abuse, and just that this is a conversation that must be led by our First Nations people, even though I have mentioned it in what I've said. And as a centre, we do work with our First Nations people, but we are there as allies to support their work. And really there also to learn from their deep understanding of their culture and the impacts on their culture of colonisation.
And thank you. And you quite rightly say, Kate, that is to be a First Nations-led response in partnership. And thank you so much for that. Roy Starkey, you've got a deep history in the health and social sector. To what extent is tackling ageism one of the keys to prevention? And how is ageism playing out every day for older people?
Thank you for the question, Philippa. I too would like to acknowledge before I begin the elders of the Bundjalung Nation from which I'm broadcasting today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So thank you. Ageism is a wicked, wicked, wicked problem. And we need to acknowledge that this can and does often lead to elder abuse. We don't allow any other isms to be acceptable, and yet we allow ageism to be acceptable. And as Kate was saying, it is societal, it is systemic, and it is personal. And I think we need to think about the language that is used, the language that we use. And when we're looking at systemic ageism, we need to look at how we frame legislation and policies. It is burden-based, it is deficit-based, and it doesn't recognise the resilience of people who have put in their years and contributed to society. And ageism also, it's not a one-size-fits-all, as Kate said. We need to have the conversation led at a community level, because what works in metropolitan and urban areas will not necessarily work within CALD communities. It certainly will not work in First Nations communities. And we have to recognise that we're coming at this from a white middle class perspective, and we have to recognise our own bias. So by thinking that we know it all, we're actually setting people up to fail. I mean, one of the things that I would like to see done is for the federal government to do a cost-benefit analysis of how not addressing ageism is impacting on the mental health, the societal health, and the general well-being of the community. So I think that we need to, and if we looked at it from a cost-benefit analysis, I believe it would be a no-brainer that we actually have to have co-designed programs to tackle this at every level. We also have to hold media accountable for their language. I saw something the other day about the elderly driver of 60. I'm 73. Now, I'm sorry, that language from that report was not acceptable.
I agree with you, and I come from a media background, and yes, or someone is described as a grandmother, or a grandfather, or that elderly driver. I picked up a colleague, and it was someone who was 57 as an elderly driver. So that is a big, big conversation, and indeed, from both of you, a call to action. And I'd like to bring Kate and Tiffany in as well about another issue too that plays into this. If I could both bring you both in here for your brief thoughts on internalized ageism, how it's important not to have a sense of self-defeat, and how important supported decision-making is in all of this. So Kate and Tiffany, over to you.
Philippa, I might jump in. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tiffany.
I'm joining from the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people today here in Victoria. Yeah, I think self-limiting beliefs is a really critical challenge that we see in the banking sector, especially as increasingly not only banking, but so many services across our community are moving to a digital format. And so there is a lot of focus on ensuring that we leave no one behind, and training programs and support content. We're always turning our mind to how can we support and enable ongoing confidence for people to maintain their own agency as they age, as life's challenges, health challenges, etc., may confront them, because maintaining control and a sense of confidence in being able to manage your own finances is a really critical insulating factor that can help prevent elder abuse.
And Kate, could I have your thoughts too? I mean, it's very interesting to hear that capacity building that Westpac is talking about in terms of older people having control of their own finances. But in terms of that internalized ageism, what would you say about that?
Firstly, I sort of referring to what Roy said about some of the other isms, and I think ageism is impacted by the other isms, the self-beliefs that we have about ourselves based on our experience in the world. And it could be about our colour, our culture, our ability, our sex, our gender, all of those things. And they're really actually critical to, to change our internalised beliefs about ourselves as well as our external beliefs, because if we do that, it could actually be the difference between someone accepting abuse and saying, well, this is just how it is because I'm a woman and I'm older, between that attitude, and actually saying, this is not okay and I deserve more and I'm going to get help.
Say that again, please, Kate.
I don't know if I can, Philippa.
That's not okay. So, Tiffany, how many of Westpac's customers are older Australians, and how much of a priority does Westpac place on preventing elder abuse?
Well, look, we don't report on the exact breakdown of customers, but I can tell you around 20% of our customer base are over the age of 65. And we also don't see that of the other banks in the industry, but we believe that we're likely to have the largest number of customers over the age of 65 of the big four banks. Elder abuse is a significant focus, and it's because we understand and see that financial abuse goes hand in hand and is often a motivating factor behind a broader elder abuse scenario, which may also include physical abuse, neglect, etc. And so we're very conscious that financial abuse and financial elder abuse is very near in to this issue. And as first responders to someone's financial needs, we may actually play a really important role in helping a customer identify for themselves that something's not right and that they are not being appropriately supported or helped by someone perhaps they have trusted to support them.
So you'd be calling it. So can I get some idea of the scale of resources that Westpac dedicates to preventing elder abuse, and what would you compare that to in terms of scale?
It's difficult to wrap our arms around it. It's kind of a whole of bank. It's unfortunately endemic in our society, not dissimilar to family violence being endemic in our society. And so we're acutely aware that it can happen anywhere to anyone at any, at any time. And so it's like we have to be alert to it in every interaction that we have. And you can imagine the tens of millions of interactions that occur every day or every year for a large bank. At an industry level, all banks need to provide extra care for customers experiencing vulnerability. And there are a broad range of vulnerabilities, an intersection of vulnerabilities as well. But elder financial abuse is one of those vulnerabilities. And so in thinking about Westpac Group, we dedicate time and resource to ensure all staff that we have who have direct conversations with customers across the organisation have been adequately trained and upskilled so they can recognise vulnerability, including elder abuse, and respond to it appropriately. Tuned into the fact that we can often be part of that first responder network that helps support a customer to steer through what is a really difficult experience and towards financial safety.
And I want to explore that more, yes. Yeah. And we've just had a question in the chat room, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to go to it, but just really praising Westpac for what it's doing, but asking a question that how can we ensure that elder financial abuse does not happen in aged care or home care? I was just wondering if I could have your comments there, please.
Oh, that's really challenging. And you're right. I guess we're always attuned when supporting or when we're seeing a supporter or a carer seek to support a customer, very attuned to new carers, and I guess unusual transactions or unusual activity that would indicate something may be out of order or not consistent with the way our customer has behaved in the past. And that can often be because there's someone new on the scene or a carer who is taking a path in their own interests and is not aware or minded to what's going to look unusual or out of order. And so I think looking at transactional behaviour, being tuned in when a customer does walk into a branch with a carer, that carer is new to us, that's going to prompt some additional questions. Unusual activity definitely prompts much more probing questions that can often make people feel quite uncomfortable, but we see it as an important role that we can play to really challenge and ensure that our customer is fully on board with something that is going to impact their financial well-being.
Now, we were going to get to this, but there seems to be a real appetite among our participants. What are the kinds of questions that you would ask to vet someone?
Yeah. So when elder abuse occurs, it is not uncommon, even in a scenario where someone has been granted a power of attorney and is acting with the consent of a customer, to see behaviour that causes us concern, and we see an arrangement which may have worked well in the past, may be going off the rails. And so some of the questions we would ask, and it's really straightforward, if we see a transaction being done that looks unusual to us, that perhaps is much larger, large cash transaction, or a transaction where funds are being requested to move from one account to the person in front of us, the helper's account, we will ask questions about, you know, help us understand, this is a large transaction, help us understand what's this for. And this is unusual. Is there another way we can do this transaction? And if we're uncomfortable, we will delay, we will defer, we will refuse to provide that service. And in really extreme cases, we will take steps to do things like to put blocks or place blocks or restraints on a customer's account and ask that power of attorney to come back into the branch when they can furnish us with a receipt or an invoice that could help us understand that large transaction. And we will have very direct conversations in a scenario where, for example, a power of attorney is perhaps taking funds out to buy a car that we then understand is for themselves, to remind them of their obligations to act in the interests of the customer. And that expense doesn't sound like that's in the best interests of Jane, our customer. And so we're uncomfortable progressing with that transaction. And so it is obviously going to manifest in many ways and shapes, but we empower our frontline teams to really put the customer at the centre of everything that they're thinking about in that moment, and ask questions if they feel uncomfortable, and to give them the empowerment to delay, defer, refuse service if they feel something's not right.
And look, thank you very much for those examples. Does it happen often, though, that you would have to have an intervention like that and actually refuse a transaction?
It's a hard question to answer for me. Even one is too often.
True.
And I think for all of us, even one instance of elder abuse is outside of anything that we'd be comfortable with. It is not, if I compare it to other forms of financial abuse, it is a very small issue in comparison to perhaps something like scams, which is growing very rapidly and is an enormous problem at a societal level for us. So it is far smaller than something like that. It would be in the rare occurrence that something really troubling like that happens. But I guess we can see a slide. It doesn't get there overnight. And there is a series of opportunities. With the benefit of hindsight, there's a series of opportunities where intervention is possible. And it's not always, you know, DEFCON 7 straight to refusing to process a transaction, but definitely being curious and asking probing questions and challenging when something doesn't feel right has to be part of how we support our customers. In every instance, it is
well, there's a barrage of questions for you, and one of them is, what about online transactions carried out by enduring powers of attorney? It's a tough one. It's
really tough. And I think this goes back to my comments earlier about the focus on supporting financial confidence and therefore agency for as long as possible. I think that it is really difficult. There's lots of people will put a power of attorney in place, but probably a far greater will set up an arrangement where perhaps they give their key card and their PIN number, or give their online banking access to someone who they are seeking the help from. as opposed to perhaps asking for some side-by-side support where they can still hold the mouse and maintain control, but perhaps just get a little bit of guidance or advice along the way to assure themselves that they're doing the right thing. What I would say is that not only Westpac, any bank in Australia is here to help. And we really value when a customer can come and ask for help and tell us exactly what they're concerned about, because that gives us enormous scope to have a more detailed conversation, considering their broader concerns, which may also include concerns for their physical safety, about the best way to support them.
And look, thank you. And I know that this is a whole of banking response, and the Australian Banking Association, as the peak body, is trying to be very proactive in this area with Anna Bly at the helm.
Yes.
We've got one of the questions from someone who's heard horror stories of overzealous tellers shutting down a person's account at the slightest word of any conflict, that it can cause havoc and a financial crisis for someone. I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts there.
I think that in these scenarios, and it's the same for every vulnerability, it requires a level of judgment. And I think the intent is always with the best interest in mind. I have no doubt that the person on the line asking the question, has heard about an instance. Yes, from time to time, across any organisation, in the pursuit of protecting a customer, we are going to have a rare occurrence where perhaps someone errs on the really conservative side to protect a customer. What I would say is the goal is always to protect. And I think that some of the lessons we're learning in the scams space are incredibly useful and informative in this space, because what is common between scams and elder abuse is a level of coercion and a level of tacit consent, or the appearance of consent from a customer who may be feeling deeply uncomfortable, may be feeling unsafe, and may be being coerced or guilted or manipulated into certain things. And that's very nuanced and very difficult, and carries with it, a level of complexity, which we are always seeking to navigate in the best way.
Thank you. And look, you hit the nail on the head, the complexity. And Roy, I'd like to come back to you. Can you talk us through a little more about what you see as the motivators and drivers of elder abuse?
I think the major motivator is probably inheritance impatience when it comes to financial. And if you look at the stats, the highest rate of reported elder abuse is financial, but it is both covert and overt. That you have your people existing, misusing powers of attorney, and I think we need to be very careful about who we appoint to be our power of attorney and our enduring guardian. And we need different people so that we've put stopgaps in place when this occurs. But I would also like to say to Tiffany that the digital divide being created by banking corporations as they remove telemachines as well as branches is allowing the covert stuff to happen, especially when people can't do their own shopping. And I know of one instance where a service provider had access, used to come in and was doing the unassisted shopping for one particular client, and was told, well, bring me back $50 cash as well as paying for the groceries. Had the PIN number, had the card, $50. But it turned out that $50 was being bought back in cash, but there was also another $100 going out each time that was not being accounted for. And this person trusted it, and it took ages. And it wasn't until one of the daughters said, hang on a minute, your account's going down, Mum, bloody, bloody, blah. And it was looked into and went back through the transaction. So there's the overt and then there's the covert. But lack of education is also one of the motivators. A lack of education and ongoing with service providers, with formal and informal carers, with professionals, and there is a lack of understanding, I think, with multidisciplinary teams, and there's certainly a lack of education around what actually constitutes elder abuse. And if we look at elder abuse, it's not only financial, and we tend to concentrate on the financial. But as I think you also said, it's not terribly different from a lot of the domestic and family violence that we see. In fact, some of it is a carryover from that. Most often, often perpetrated by family members. Yeah. So we need to educate people, and we need to have intergenerational, from primary school onwards, that this is not okay, that we don't treat our seniors in such a disrespectful way. We need to build respect for seniors. I think when we look at the LGBTI communities, we often don't have biological families who step in for us, and sometimes that's really good. So we need to be very careful about who we appoint in these roles. And I mean, personally, I think you need to have different people for different roles, so that there is a stopgap happening there and a checks and balances. Also, that we need to have really good education in rural and remote regions about what constitutes, because although the figures of reporting in rural and remote do not appear to be much higher than metropolitan and urban areas, what is acceptable and what's been a lifestyle thing out of the remote area farm can often be neglect. So there's a whole range of stuff that needs to occur, and we need to look at it in a really, on a societal level. And we need to, well, that might work in Redfern, but it sure ain't going to work out the back of Burke with a different community. And so we need to be really careful about where these things are happening. I think we need to actually really make sure that service providers, who are often the first people in there, that they are aware of it. So we need to, so there's a whole lot of motivators. It's greed, it's people seeing elders as a waste of space. We look at older people as a burden. You don't hear about anything about the investment in pensions. We hear about the burden that is coming as we age. Well, and that devalues. And if you devalue somebody, it doesn't matter what you do with them. And so we need to think about, as a community and a society, how are we, and we all have a responsibility here, how are we going to change it? So we need to take the drivers away. We need to take the motivations for abuse away. And we need to be aware that sometimes that in the pursuit of profit, corporations are actually contributing to it, because if I can't drive and I live out the back of Main Arm up here in the Northern Rivers and I can't drive, but I trust my neighbour, they've got access to my PIN and a whole range of things. And they are also responsible for bringing nutrition into me. So there's a range of issues that are going on there that people don't think about, because, oh, we'll sit in our ivory towers in Macquarie Street and we'll work this out. And that's going to work for everybody. Well, it might work in Collins Street, but it may not work in Echuca. So we need
or Echuca.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you raise so many of the issues that we have to take into account in prevention strategies. And Kate, I'd like to ask you about some of that intergenerational work you've been doing. And then Tiffany, I might get back to you around the digital divide stuff as well, but you have touched on that. But Kate, you've been doing this work to attempt to challenge the social norms, to shift mindsets. What have you been doing, and what do you see when you're evaluating the impact of the work you're doing?
Yeah, look, I think there's some really interesting work happening in the intergenerational space. And I know in our region alone, there's local governments and some of our partner organisations who are really interested in working in this space. And our work really came from our framework, where we identified 3 themes. And one of those themes was fostering positive attitudes and behaviours towards ageing. And one of the goals that was part of that theme was to promote an intergenerational approach to living, an approach that embraces diversity, experience, all ages, across all the settings where we work and live and play. So once we released the framework, we had a few people, members of the network, who were really interested in an intergenerational project. So we had a working group and we met over a period of about 2 years and had lots of ideas and no money. So we were very fortunate to have some funding that was really around social connectedness and community wellbeing. And we placed a lens of the intergenerational lens over that work. Our project was with young primary school children and older people over 55, but I think it's a really important thing to note that intergenerational can be 50-year-olds and 70-year-olds, or 20-year-olds and 40-year-olds. It's certainly not just those 2 extremes, but that is the approach we went with. So the project was led by a community artist, Lisa Tanaka King, and she brought the younger and older people together in a very safe and a supported environment to work on a community art piece that was then installed in a local and very well used laneway. And that laneway actually connected the local township area and the retail area and services with the library and the basketball centre. So the project was fully documented in a film called Art is for Everyone that you can get off Eastern Community Legal Centre's website if you're interested in having a look. But what we really found was that the young people who were involved were reporting that things like they became more comfortable talking to older people and being friends with older people. They started to say things like, oh, well, older people were more interesting than I had thought. And one of our participants, I think, said something like, it's just, older people are just more than sitting in a rocking chair knitting, like all the storybooks say. So we saw some of those lovely shifts in attitudes around older people from the young people. And the older people reported really significant improvements in their feelings of well-being and social connectedness and just having a good old laugh and a bit of fun with younger people, which was something missing from their lives. So I think sometimes we hear and, we can question, is a project like this really going to stop elder abuse from occurring? And I think probably not on its own, but what we need to be doing is developing smaller, larger, population-wide, all sorts of different programs, including, the things that Tiffany has spoken about that's happening at the banks, the things that Roy has spoken about, but they need to be mutually reinforcing strategies across the whole of community, and that's when we'll start to see a change.
It's very exciting work you're doing, Kate, and I'd love to see that laneway that links all those services as well. And I wanted to say to everyone that after this session, after this webinar, Compass and EAAA will provide links and information to all the questions you're asking. There are a lot about banking, so I might go back to Tiffany, but we're not going to get to all the questions, but we want your engagement. Keep asking the questions and we will make sure that we answer each and every one of them. So thank you. So Tiffany, we might we've had one comment that online banking makes older people more vulnerable. This is the question you get from your critics about how effective can the banks be given in preventing elder abuse, given the extent of branch closures, long lines at post offices, and the technology divide or gap. If I could have your remarks there, please.
Sure. Look, it's true that across the industry, all of the banks are rationalising branches. Westpac still have about 700 branches nationwide. I think it's important, or what we consider important, is that we are just as focused in our telephone conversations and interactions with customers as we are in our face-to-face branch interactions, in terms of looking for the signs and listening for the signs, both expressed needs and unexpressed needs, that give us a clue that someone may be experiencing vulnerability. And one of the critical things or actions that we take is that, with a customer's consent, we will place a flag on their accounts. We have a number of flags that allow us to record what extra care or what vulnerability the customer is experiencing, so that every interaction they're having from then on out is informed by their needs. And those extra care needs may be as simple as extra time and patience and sensitivity required, or speaking more slowly or clearly. It may be to take the customer to a quiet room. It may be that they've explicitly told us that they are experiencing elder financial abuse, and so the flag will be explicit, or family and domestic violence, the flag will be more explicit. Or that they might be seeking safe communication, or for us to take them to a quiet room, or to have privacy. I think that kind of flagging capability is really essential, so that the next banker that you're speaking to can see that and be sensitive to that, and ensure that they are conscious as you are interacting with what your needs might be. I think one of the challenges is, and for perspective, we have roughly 7,000 customers with active flags on their accounts at the moment, at any one time. So based on September numbers, about 7,000 customers have consented to having that kind of flagging on their accounts that allow us to be attuned to their unique needs and vulnerabilities, so that we can provide extra care.
And how many of them would you say would be older people? What percentage?
In terms of about almost half, about 46% of those flags are for people over the age of 65 today, based on our recent numbers. One thing I did want to say though, Philippa, and you know, just reflecting on the point that one of our listeners has raised, which is, you know, is online banking making people more vulnerable? The counter I would offer is that there's an enormous power and control that comes with online banking. You can block transactions on your account at the press of a button from online banking. And some of the training that we're investing in, so we've had thousands of our bankers trained in supporting customers develop digital confidence and having digital conversations. And over 110,000 customers since June have gone through a digital conversation to build that confidence, to enable them to do online banking. We give them things like QR codes, which are almost like a shortcut to kind of very simple guides, so they can refer to it later or remind themselves at home after the training's finished on what is it that I need to do again. But online banking, being digitally active, is incredibly powerful to, you know, shut down the risk at a moment's notice on your account. And so we actually see it as an incredibly protective mechanism for customers to protect their finances if they're in a scenario where they are concerned about financial abuse, especially if they have shared their confidential information, such as passwords, etc., with someone who they felt was trusted, but perhaps that trust has been eroded.
So I'm getting a very strong message here from you, Tiffany, from Westpac, and I suppose all of the banks, that please try and come forward and say that you need help, that you've really got to speak up, which requires a lot of agency as well, and that you will be able to help.
Yeah,
that you are attuned to it.
Philippa. Absolutely. And I think, you know, you alluded earlier to this, but the Australian Banking Association and the industry is actively lobbying government for changes to the current complexity that we are all facing into. There are real considerations and limitations in privacy law that mean that organisations like banks and others are really limited in how they can respond when they suspect elder abuse. There is not a national framework for powers of attorney. There is not a national framework for organisations, all service organisations, telcos, etc., banks, etc., to refer matters to where they have a high degree of concern about a customer's financial safety. And those kinds of carve-outs and exceptions to privacy law are reserved for imminent risk to life. And those are the only circumstances where we can really take very strong action to protect an extremely vulnerable person. But when that harm is potentially an extreme risk to their entire financial safety, there is no scope currently in the legal framework for organisations, including banks, to protect a customer. And that is really challenging. And there is not a common framework around really important instruments like powers of attorney or safeguarding agencies who can further investigate and understand and protect customers more broadly. Those are some really important things that we are hoping to see shift with the work being done by the ABA and across the industry to drive.
And I might just bring in our other participants, because Roy and Kate, there's a lot of work happening in that area, isn't there? It's a very much a joint approach.
Yes, there is. But we seem to be concentrating more on the financial abuse. But if we look at preventing abuse of elders, there are a number of things that contribute to it. And I'd like to build on something that Kate spoke about, was the intergenerational stuff that happened. But if we look at how we design our cities, how we allow developments to happen where we isolate older people, and we know that social isolation allows for abuse to occur more readily. Now, if we had intergenerational living, as they have in the Dutch model, where university students live in the villages, in the, and I hate this term, retirement villages, and they provide supports for older generations. There's social interaction, there's mental stimulation, and I'm noticing that in the chat box, there was a woman who said that her mother lived to be 98, no dementia, and loved interacting with people. Why don't we have more intergenerational stuff? And I think that we, as one of the preventions that we need to have, there is that. And so we need to look at that along with education and along with arts and age and breaking social isolation. Sorry, Kate.
No, that's fine. I completely agree. And it makes me think of a conversation this morning I had with some colleagues, and they were doing some work with some older people yesterday out in the community. And the feedback from these community members is that we just don't talk about this. So we don't have the opportunity to express how we're feeling about aging, to talk about how we're feeling about aging, to understand why we feel like this, why as a society we have these attitudes towards aging. So there's so much that could be done, right down to just that simple thing of having conversations and planning ahead and talking about aging, because we're all doing it. So we need to just be having those conversations more.
Exactly. And I'd like to bring you back in here, Roy. I mean, you facilitate a group of people that get together and talk about everything you should have in place. And one is, what happens if I lose capacity? Who is going to care for me? And I think you've got a quick checklist that you can run through, and people can go to the Compass website afterwards. What's your checklist there, Roy?
Oh, well, my checklist was being sure of the people that I have in place, that if I lose capacity, and we need to have these things in place from a very early age, because any one of us at any time can lose capacity. It happened to me when I had a major motor vehicle accident, and my partner had to take over everything, but that was extremely difficult. So we need to look at who we appoint, how we appoint them. We need to make sure that people are not isolated. I don't facilitate the group, by the way. We just started off as a loose conglomeration of older guys, and we get together. I've become a bit of a resource within it because of some of the knowledge I have. We need to teach people about advocacy groups. I speak to them about, I'll be talking to somebody and say, well, have you spoken with OPAN? Who are they? Have you spoken with Seniors' Rights? Who are they? And people don't become aware of these issues, of these agencies, until it's too late or until it's needed. So we need to have this in the back of our mind. And I think that for my own personal checklist, it's about being community connected. So therefore I'm not isolated. I don't self-denigrate. I'm out there doing what I can with people of a similar age and younger. I mean, I was at the gym this morning and it was wonderful. All the younger folk that I've got to know, who acknowledge you, and at least and that's a beginning, and that's good for your mental health. And to go back to something I said earlier, if we look at the cost-benefit analysis of ageism and abuse, to me, it's a no-brainer. So we need to, and financial terms speak really loudly to government. And so as seniors, I think we need to be pushing this. And I know that in New South Wales it's happening, and I'm not sure about Victoria. Victoria sometimes is 3 steps ahead of us. Sorry, Minister, I didn't say that, but it is.
You'll be knocked off your Ministerial Advisory Council if you're not careful. But yes, it is a conversation. And look, we've got Teresa, chairperson of the African Women's and Families Network, talking about, well, what are the strategies to be put in place for capacity buildings of families and relatives to support older people from diverse African communities with limited or no English or no English. So these are the challenges that we have to rise to, and the time frame is now. It's not sort of a long runway down. It's now, and Teresa will respond more fully there. I'd just like to quickly whip around our panel to give us what would be 3 of the warning signs of elder abuse where you might be able to prevent it happening. Kate, would you have a couple of the warning signs that you would like to identify for us?
Yeah, and warning signs probably isn't a term we use much in primary prevention. So coming from that perspective, I think warning signs are really a demonstration in our community and society of beliefs and attitudes that value some people more than others and afford power to some people more than others. This could be, as an example, valuing younger people over older people, but there's so many different examples we could show, because it's not just ageism that we're talking about. But I think part of this, it's also really important to note that the drivers of elder abuse, we don't actually have a strong evidence base around this. We need more evidence to support our work, because whilst ageism is an important part of the conversation, as I said earlier, we know that all those other things that impact our experience of living around our sex and gender and ability and colour, these all contribute to a person's experience of ageing and also their possibility of experiencing elder abuse.
And Roy, can I have your thoughts there on warning signs?
Warning signs: increased depression in people quite often, poor nutrition, lack of being able to attend social things because of financial stressors, and also unstable housing, for me, is one of the biggest warning signs that abuse can occur, because we know that people in unstable housing are more likely to be abused by others.
And Tiffany, can I bring you in with a couple of warning signs that you've identified?
So I'll speak to just warning signs around financial elder abuse. Seeing a customer confused or seeking clarity on perhaps why their bank balance is not where they thought it should be is a really early warning sign of the earliest stages. And Roy mentioned it, you know, please bring me $50 back, and it's actually $150 being taken. So that kind of unexpected surprise or concern around a bank balance is often one of the earliest warning signs that something's going astray. More broadly, and I guess I'm putting myself in the shoes of an older person who perhaps has loved ones around them or carers supporting them, just the sense or feelings of shame, feelings of guilt. And I do wonder if I'm feeling shame and I'm feeling guilt, whether there's someone in my world making me feel that way, or leading me to have those doubts or concerns about whether I'm doing enough, or whether I'm parenting the right way, or doing the right thing as a parent, grandparent, whatever the case may be. But just, I guess, tuning in to the emotions and thinking, is there someone in my world who's making me feel that way, shameful or guilty? Because that, again, is the beginning of that entitlement. Roy, you talked about it as inheritance impatience. Those feelings of entitlement come from somewhere, but it's how they make you feel that can start to tune you into, am I becoming susceptible or vulnerable to someone who I love very deeply or care for in my community or in my family circle?
We're almost out of time. Thank you very much, Tiffany. And I just want to get some closing remarks, that call for action. I'd like you, each of you, to give us a message you'd like to leave us with in preventing elder abuse. What are some of the key steps you can take? If I could go to you, Kate, first of all.
Yes, I think my message would be that if we don't invest further in primary prevention and hold it up alongside early intervention and response, then we're never going to have an impact on the number of people who experience elder abuse in the community and the demands on our systems, and we're going to have to keep protecting people from this happening.
Thank you, Roy.
I think there's a number of steps we can take, and most importantly for me is the education, making people aware from a very early age, the paperwork and also the advocacy groups as well, and not to be afraid to ask.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue for you, Tiffany, isn't it?
It is. Don't be afraid to ask, whether that's asking for help on how to maintain and upskill around digital banking or doing your banking in different ways, or whether that is asking for help because you're beginning to feel uncomfortable or have concerns about someone accessing your funds who shouldn't.
Thank you. And I would like to mention that after today's webinar, there will be a link to the recording and a Q&A sheet with answers along to other key sections about preventing elder abuse on the Compass website. So that will be in a follow-up email to all our participants. Please join me in thanking our incredible panelists, Roy, Kate, and Tiffany. If any of this has raised issues for you, 1-800-ELDER-HELP, 1-800-353-374, 1-800-353-374. Our next webinar is on elder abuse, responding to elder abuse. It will be on Thursday, the 8th of December at 12:30. We'd love you to join us. Stay well, and until next time, goodbye.